Hello, my name is Ava Herms, and I will be teaching you all about women's suffrage. The Common Core standard that we will be using is students understand the democratic principles of justice, equality, responsibility, and freedom that apply to them to real-life situations. So, in order to understand this lesson, you will need to know what suffrage means. So, the prefix means under or below, and the suffix means activity or result of action. So what was women's suffrage? Suffrage means the right to vote. Women's suffrage was the fight for women to be able to vote. So when was women's suffrage? The movement began in the 1840s. The right for women to vote was included in the Constitution in the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. The movement lasted 80 years before women could vote. Who was involved? So there are a lot of people who were involved in this movement. It was mostly women, but there were some men. The most famous activists were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Alice Paul. Susan B. Anthony, she is one of the more known activists during this movement. She was originally a teacher and became a strong abolitionist and women's rights activist. Anthony created a newspaper for women's rights called The Revolution. She gave speeches at rallies for women's rights, and she was even arrested for illegally voting. Unfortunately, Susan B. Anthony died before women were able to legally vote. The next person was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She is one of the more known suffragists, and she was also good friends with Susan B. Anthony. They usually worked together. Elizabeth Cady Stanton created the National Women's Suffrage Association with Susan B. Anthony, and I didn't include this, but she also passed away before women were legally allowed to vote. Lastly, Alice Paul was a suffragist who was also arrested, but she was arrested for her protesting. Even while she was in prison, she was trying to make a statement, so she took part in a hunger strike, and she was forced to eat. She was one of the suffragists who were alive when President Wilson endorsed and passed the 19th Amendment. Even after women were able to vote, Alice Paul continued to fight for gender equality. So here's a little video about how these women have affected us today. You will not be able to hear the audio, but it is captioned, so you should be able to read it. Okay, and here's a picture of some of the women marching. Women marching for the women's rights movement. So we will be creating a timeline about women's suffrage, and the rubric is so it's a little small, so I'm going to X out and find a better one. Let me see. Here it is. Okay, so you'll have to have a title for your rubric, or for your timeline. So to get full points, the timeline has to have a creative title that accurately describes the material and is easy to locate. For contents and facts, facts are accurate for all events and reported on the timeline. Readability. The overall appearance of the timeline is pleasing and easy to read. Dates. An accurate, complete date has been included for each event. Graphics. All graphics are effective and balanced with text use. Preparation. The student had notes about all the events and dates he or she wished to include on the timeline before beginning to design the timeline. Resources. The timeline contained at least 8 to 10 events related to the topic being studied. All right. And so what's next? After we research events and people of the women's suffrage movement, we will be creating a can of character for someone who was involved in the women's suffrage movement. What we will need is a can, and by can I mean like a coffee can or a Pringles can, something with a lid that you can take on and off. We'll also need construction paper, scissors, tape or hot glue gun, yarn, fabric, and paper. So how this works is that we take a can and we decorate it. So we make it look like the person we are doing research on. So for example, you could do Susan B. Anthony. You might want to put gray hair and glasses on it. And then you take off the lid and you put characteristics of her and what she did and who she was in it. So you might have a piece of paper in it that says she was a woman suffragist, she created the revolution, she was arrested for voting illegally. So that might be something that you put inside of it. But we will work on that after our timeline. I just wanted to let everyone know what's coming up next. All right, so now we have an assessment that we are going to do. And we just need to follow this link. So, all right, so here are the questions, but if you just follow the link and answer it. So first you would type in your name and your email. First question is, true or false, Alice Paul never was able to see women vote. And then the next question, in your own words, explain what the women's suffrage movement was. Who was involved? Why did it happen? What was the outcome? List the possible events that you plan to research and add to your timeline. And with that one, you don't have to go in detail. You can just list probably like around 3 or 4 of the events because you haven't researched it yet. Finally, if you have any questions about the movement or anything like that, just answer that as well. Thank you.